Okay, guys, I am back again. I know it's been a very long time, and I know that I have promised this video for a long time. It's been one of those videos that has taken me a very long time to put together. I've had a lot of things going on. In particular, I am trying to buy a house at the moment. In fact, I'm trying to move interstate, and it is so hard. The differences in systems, dealing with banks, dealing with real estate agents, and that's saying a lot because, as many of you might know, I am a real estate agent. I have sold hundreds of houses in my day, and yet trying to buy a property in a new state is literally sucking the soul right from my body and sucking every minute of time and energy that I have. There's been multiple trips interstate, lots of things like that. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the top 10 figs in the world. And it's been a long time coming, this list. I've started it now several months ago. And we did the top 40 down to 30, the 30 down to 20, 20 down to 10. And here we sit today ready to finish this list off. Now, it's going to take me a lot of time to get through this. I have written up a whole lot of notes of this. In fact, I have notes floating about here. Notes everywhere. I have over 30 pages of notes to get through with this particular video. I'm trying my best not to read off the screen too much, but as I continue on, my brain is getting fuzzier and fuzzier. I'm actually, as I record this, watching the sun start to go down. I like to do my introductions after I finish my videos, but it's getting dark, and I thought it'd be a little bit strange to have the introduction in the dark and then all the videos are kind of in the daytime. So I'm in the middle of the videos. I've just recorded number 6 on the list, and I'm about to move on to number 5. It's going to be a long one, guys. In some of the last videos and the comments that I received, a lot of people said that almost as interesting as the actual ranking of the figs, you really like to get the history and the bits and pieces that came along with each of those figs. And so I've spent a little bit of time where I could to find about the history of the figs, a little bit of the bits and pieces that at least I like to know about these figs, and I hope you guys sharing the hobby might have a little bit of the same experiences. So maybe step aside, get yourself a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. I'm not sure how long this entire video is going to be by the end, but I suspect it's going to be a fairly long one. So buckle in, guys, get yourself a plate of figs, and let's get straight into it with the top 10 figs in the world. Okay, guys, now opening up our list, in the number 10th spot is an extremely popular and a very old fig by the name of Bourjassotte Gris, or Violet Sapor. Now, this fig was actually originally studied under the name Bourjassotte Gris in 1854 by a French horticulturalist of the name Adriatic JH. Now, Frères was the first to study it under Bourjassotte Gris, but then some other researchers later came along. For instance, in 1872, a researcher by the name of Pearson came along and said that he actually believed it was an older variety of a fig called Blanche. Now, today we know it as Violet Sapor or Bourjassotte Gris, but it's possible that in the past that it was actually an even older fig described under another name. 100 years prior to Adalbert Frères in 1787, another researcher by the name of Bernard described a fig by the name of Grasse or Fig du Grasse, which he described had all of the same characteristics of Bourjassotte Gris, and in fact a fig cutting was sent along by the Chiswick collection to California, which was later fruited and under many different conditions and was found to be identical to Bourjassotte Gris, giving a lot of credence to this possibility that it's a much older fig than what even Adalbert Frères was describing when it was first talked about as Bourjassotte Gris. Now, the Chiswick collection, for those of you that don't know, it was established by the UK Horticulture Society in the early 1800s. A lot of the figs that were in that collection were kind of donated by various members and were actually a lot older than that, so came from the 1700s and potentially even before. Heritage plants that had been in members' gardens and collections for a number of years. In 1826, the Chiswick collection had around 75 different varieties in the collection, and they actually sent them all, or the majority of their cuttings, over to the US. They were sent into California and Georgia under different label numbers. Now, it's interesting because some forum members did a little bit of research into the Chiswick collection. It was found that there were some duplicate label numbers of figs in that collection, and of those duplicate numbers, we found that 2 figs that were sent over, one was sent over was Violet Sapor and one that was sent over was Bourjassotte Gris, and they were both subject to duplication, and at the time they were actually sent across as distinct varieties. And so Bourjassotte Gris was duplicated with Bourjassotte Noir, and Violette's support was duplicated with a fig by the name of Bavaria, which is a fig that there is very little, if any, information on at the moment, at least that I have been able to find. So to me, I've got a little bit of my own personal theory that maybe something happened along the way back in the late 1800s when these kind of cuttings were sent along. Somebody made an error and there was some duplicate entries in there, and at least at the start, Violette's Support and Bourjassotte were sent across as different plants, but today genetic testing actually shows that they are the same variety. So maybe there was a mix-up in there somehow. It's just coincidental that the only duplicates related to these two plants, at least in my mind. So Bourjassotte is also considered synonymous with another really popular fig called Socorro Black. As the name might suggest, it's a grey-green fig. It has a bright red, deep red interior. It's extremely sweet. It's said to have strong to very strong berry flavours and can be quite dense and jammy. It's one of those figs that has actually been described throughout history as an exceptional fig, not just in recent times. In 1891, a researcher called Barron said that was his most consistently excellent fig, and even a gourmet cook or a chef in England wrote a book called The Anatomy of Dessert, and he described the fig as the Bourjassotte fig with its brown, red, almost jelly-like interior is at the foremost rank of figdom. Pretty high praise right there. This fig suffers occasionally fruit drop on the main crop, and some people speculate that this might be something to do with maybe a partial incomplete parthenocarpy, which is the process of female figs not needing to be fertilized by the fig wasp in order to retain their fruit and having that kind of persistent gene that allows them to fruit even without pollination. So this is an extremely popular fig on my list, opening up in number 10 today. It's 39 people voted on this fig as one of their top 5 figs, and it scored a total of 119 points. And so moving on to number 9 on our list, and this is another extremely popular fig. In fact, this is a very popular class of figs. They all share very similar characteristics, and they are the Col de Dames, but in particular the Col de Dame Blanc. This is the most popular of the Col de Dames that was ranked on my list, coming into the 9th position. It is one of those really old figs. It was researched and described as early as the 1820s, although it's thought to be even older than that. It's got a lot of different synonyms out there, such as Col de Dames, Col de Signora, and very similar names. And that Col de Dame is French and literally stands for collar of the lady or lady's collar, and that actually describes the unique shape of this fruit and having quite a pronounced neck, which people describe as similar to the shape of a lady's neck. Now, as with many of these old figs, these old kind of European figs, it's very difficult to determine the exact country of origin. Most people say that it either comes from France or comes from Spain, and most people out there at the moment kind of lean towards Spain being the country of origin for this particular fig. It's a variety that was sent across again as part of the Chiswick collection. It was stated on by many of the famous researchers such as Condé and Eisen, and Condé in his monograph wrote of this fig that it's a vigorous to upright growing tree that has few to no bravers, a prominent partially closed or partially open eye, and a very pronounced neck. Now in 2020, this fig, there's a really good tasting video by Ross Raddy online which shows him talking about the Col de Dame Blanc and the other Col de Dames and how they have a unique texture compared to other figs that are out there, and it's quite a thick and unique texture that really adds to the flavour of the fruit. He described it as his tastiest of all his figs. And if you watch other videos, there's another really good one by the Millennial Gardener out there, and you can see that he speaks about the same thing, saying that it's this thick kind of texture that is described as potentially cakey, jam-like, or even like fig preserves. And it's actually the texture of the fig that seems to be popping up even in the kind of forums and other places that really adds to the joy of eating this particular fig. The flavour itself is described as being sweet to very sweet. It's got complex, moderate to strong berry flavours. and it has a green to yellow skin and a deep red interior. The Calderonas are all extremely popular, but the Calderona Blanc came in first position on my list. It scored 123 points and was voted on by 32 people as one of their top 5 figs. Okay, moving straight into the 8th position, and we have the last Adriatic type fig that is on our list. Now, if you've watched the list so far and some of those previous videos, and if you haven't done that, go back and watch them now. We have already discovered a number of these Adriatic types that have ended up on the list and are always very, very popular. So we had the Battaglia Green that was on the list. We had White Madeira #1 was on the list. We had Strawberry Verte on the list. We even had some figs like Panache, which is often thought of as an Adriatic type fig, and Conadria, which is an Adriatic hybrid. So very, very popular class of figs, these Adriatic types, and this is the highest rated of them all. And it's a relatively new fig to enter the kind of the community and to be grown these days. It was only discovered in 2001. It was discovered by a chiropractor of the name Joseph Hood, and he purchased a property in Austin, Texas, and on that property he found that there was an established fig tree, and he was a collector himself. He had over 50 varieties, and he kind of thought that this was perhaps coming from a nursery somewhere in the area because a few blocks away there was an identical tree growing, which kind of implies that somebody was supplying this, unless there were cuttings that were taken from friends, who knows. Mr. Joseph Hood, he said that of the 50 plants he had, the 50 different figs, all things considering, that this fig was possibly the very best of them all. So Joseph had a look, and he was quite knowledgeable about figs already, and he said that this was very similar to the Adriatic types that was described by Condit and others. And as with all the Adriatic types, that shares those same characteristics. We have the bright green skin, the deep red interior, the strong berry to strawberry-like flavours with good acidity. It's quite a resilient tree that can be adapted to a lot of different conditions, and is extremely popular amongst the community. Often people voted this fig as one of their very, very favourites, and that's why it's ended up in our 8th spot here today. It was voted on by 36 people as one of their top 5 figs, scoring a total of 127 points on my list. And into number 7, we have another one of those figs that is extremely popular, a crowd favourite. It's one of those figs that's known as a classic fig, and that many people say that everybody should have in their collection. And it's one of the most popularly planted figs throughout the US. It is, of course, Celeste, less commonly but also known as Celestial. Now, this is a potentially very old fig. Condit thought that this was an older fig by the name of Malta, and Malta pops up as early as 1768 by a researcher by the name of Miller. Now, despite being a very old fig and a very common fig, there isn't actually a lot of history attached to this fig that at least I could find. We can say that in the 100 years leading up to 1897, 90% of all the fig trees that were planted in Louisiana and Mississippi were the Celeste variety. And in colder regions up north, along with Brunswick and brown turkey in this era, Celeste was again one of the most commonly planted trees in home gardens. Now, despite being a delicious fig and a very productive fig, this particular variety never found commercial success. And the reason is that Celeste, although delicious, is also got very small fruits, commonly at or below 10 grams. Celeste can also suffer from fruit drop, which makes it unreliable, and so it really never really found that commercial success that some other figs at least have found. Celeste shows, though, that really big things can come in small packages because it is an extremely adaptable, great fig. It is delicious, and it is extremely reliable and adaptable to a range of conditions. It can deal with heat, it can deal with cold, it can deal with humidity, it can deal with rainfall. It really is a great fig. It is extremely productive, and it has an extremely high sugar content, which can allow it to dry on the tree without spoiling. Now, the great favourable qualities of Celeste have meant that other people have used Celeste often as a mother plant in the experiments and their breeding programs to produce new varieties of figs. And most famously is the breeding program that came out of LSU, where they used Celeste as the mother plant for the majority of the figs that they had in their breeding program, and they came out with some exceptional figs. They had the LSU Gold, the LSU Hollier, the LSU Purple, there was a Scots Black, the LSU Tiger, and all of these figs actually had Celeste as the mother fig. Celeste as the mother fig came out a bunch of different Celeste flankers as well. There's, for instance, the Blue Celeste and the Improved Celeste. So Celeste really is one of those figs that everybody seems to love. In terms of flavour, Celeste has a fairly linear profile. It's an extremely sweet fig. It's considered a sugar fig. It has brown sugar, a little bit of caramel flavours in there, and extremely high sugar levels. And again, those high sugar levels allow the plant to sit on the tree and protect it from pathogens, which allow it to kind of dry out and become really, really super sweet, which is often a great feature to have. Celeste is a crowd favourite. It's been around for so long and is so common that almost everybody has had the chance to try or taste Celeste. And in my list, it scored 130 points, being voted on by 39 people as one of their top 5 figs. Okay, into our 6th spot now, and we have a cult forum classic. This is one of those figs that has a cult following to it. It's one of those figs that every time that the best figs are discussed, this is one that appears over and over again. And there's another one of these cult favourites a little bit up the list as well. But this is the last Italian fig on our list, and that might give it away, but it's the Italian 258. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a fig that's been in the US market now for at least since the 1980s. And yet it's only really in recent times that it's kind of gained that really large popularity and that following amongst fig collectors of the world. It's a fig that it was originally from Italy, as the name suggests. It was collected by a man by the name of Dr. Giorgio Grassi. Now, Dr. Grassi, he worked for the Italian Ministry for Agriculture and a couple of other government-type bodies, and he was looking at ways to stimulate the local economy through maybe projects and other bits and pieces, and that kind of led him to travel around the country a little bit. And in his travels, he collected figs, as many of us do. And at some point, though, during his life, Dr. Grassi had some sort of disaster strike, and he lost all of the notes and all of the descriptions of his figs and was forced to come up with a new naming system, and he named them all by numbers. And it was in this way that the Italian 258 was born. So this is the 258 Italian fig in his collection. And so he had these figs for a while, and they came over to America a little bit later in the 1980s. They were introduced by an agricultural lawyer of some description. His name was Todd Kennedy. So Todd Kennedy lived in San Francisco, and he imported all of these figs and donated many of them to the National Journal Repository. And as a part of that, he eventually had this fig, which would become the known and loved and beautiful fig that we have today. So today it's considered one of the finest figs in terms of flavour that's available. It's a thick-skinned plant. It has medium to large fruit. And it's one of those plants that just people can't stop talking about. It does have a couple of synonyms out there, most notably. Some people say that Genovese Nero is a synonym for the Italian 258, and that actually appeared in the 33rd position on my list. And if they are actually the same fruit, then this fig would be even higher on my list. The flavours of the fig are considered to be complex, honey berry-like flavours. They're said to be thick and intense and jammy. They're said to have like a jelly-like consistency. It's a fig that does have some drawbacks. However, it's a fig that requires a little bit of a longer season in order to ripen properly. If you're in many parts of the US, you'll actually need to have a greenhouse in order to ripen this fig. Some people say that it is a fig that's susceptible to cracking and splitting as well, whilst other people say that the thick skin actually protects the plant from splitting and cracking. So maybe it depends upon the exact environment in which you're growing it. This is a fig that has often got a drop of honey at the eye, and that can happen even before the fig is totally ripe. And that's good because when the kind of honey solidifies in the eye of the fruit, it prevents entry from insects and other kind of things that might enter the fruit. It's commonly thought that spoilage of figs and souring of figs is from little insects that bring bacteria and fungus into the fruit and spoil it from the inside. So having that drop of honey kind of closes up that entryway and allows the fig to hang on the plant a little bit longer without that risk of spoiling. So as I said, cult-like following for this fig, the 6th position, Italian 258, scoring 145 points on my list, being voted on by 42 people as one of their top 5 figs. Okay, guys, we are at the halfway point in this list today, and this is a big one. This is a very, very popular fig, as they all have been, but this one is exceptionally popular, and we've had some heavy hitters so far already. We had the last Italian fig on the list, which was the Italian 258. We had the last Adriatic type fig on the list, which is the Adriatic JH, and right now we have the last Mount Etna type on the list. Now, this Mount Etna type is perhaps the most famous of them all and probably the most widely distributed fig, at least in the cooler regions of the US, and it is, of course, the hardy Chicago. And since this is the last Mount Etna type on the list, I thought we'd go into it a little bit more, maybe talk about some of the additional history behind the Mount Etna types as much as we can work out, maybe some of the controversies, maybe some of the questions that still remain about this particular class of figs, and especially since they are so popular. We've obviously spoken about a number of these figs in my earlier videos, and you can go back and watch them to find out what those Mount Etna types were. But today, with the hardy Chicago in particular, it's an important one to talk about because the entire Mount Etna classification actually arose from this particular fig. And it's an interesting story about how this happened. So back in the day, before figs were fun, before the Our Figs forums, there was a forums called the Garden Web Forums. Today they're known as House, and in my opinion, they were much better back then, but that's a different story. In these Garden Web forums, approximately 2006, there became a post one day asking for people to submit some photos of the hardy Chicago fig. And this post was started by a user by the name of Sergio. Now, for whatever reason, Sergio really wanted to find out the history of the hardy Chicago. He was asking people about their pictures and etc. And he seemed to have a little bit of an idea about the history of Rita because he already believed that it was a Sicilian-based fig. And so Sergio had a bit of plan. What he was going to do was he was going to email the professors down at the agricultural department at the Catania University, which was a university at the base of Mount Etna in Sicily. It's approximately a 1-hour drive away. And so that's exactly what Sergio did. He sent all that information across. He got that over to the professors there and he asked if they had known anything about the fig. And these professors, they had actually seen this fig before. And they replied back, yes, we know of this fig, but don't worry about that fig. We have way better figs. We have larger figs. We have sweeter figs. We have so many better figs than the fig on the mountain, which only the shepherds and their sheep eat. Now, Sergio mentioned a few different things about these kind of shepherd's figs, the figs up the mountain, saying things like they would use the sap in cheese making and other things, which may or may not be true. I've not heard of that before. But Sergio had a lot of trouble actually getting information about these specific figs out of those professors. And in fact, Sergio, in his own words, wrote, "Unfortunately, I've had many difficulties to find other news from Sicily, because on the slopes of Mount Etna, to the lower levels, are cultivated many varieties of figs, and all the people are a lot more interested to speak to me from Sicily about the bigger figs or to send me cuttings." And you can almost imagine these Sicilian professors sitting there in their university at the base of Mount Etna, surrounded by some of the most beautiful and delicious figs in the world. And they're getting emails from this supposed madman wanting to know about the figs up the mountain, which was so unpopular they hadn't even been named. You can kind of imagine sitting there by themselves, saying, "Hey, Romano, what is it? Got another email. What email? An email about the guy. What guy? The guy about the figs. Which figs? The figs up the mountain. That guy. Yes, that guy. Emailing me again. What does he want? Did you tell him about the big figs, the good figs, the sweet figs? Yeah, I told him about the big figs, the good figs, the sweet figs. He wants to know about the mountain figs up the mountains. You tell that guy to come to Sicily, then walk up the mountains and see the small figs. Tell you what, I'll send him cuttings. Tell him I'll send him cuttings of good figs. Don't worry. Tell him I'll send him those cuttings. And apologies to all the Sicilians out there and probably everybody else. But that's just how I imagine in my mind this kind of exchange going with these professors getting bombarded with emails about these figs that they literally didn't care about. But Sergio, he didn't give up. He kept going. He kept trying. And eventually he kind of put together a little bit more of a story, a bit of a tale about how he thought it all went. He tracked down a guy, and this guy was of the name Fred Bourne. And Fred Bourne apparently told Sergio that the Chicago Hardy was sourced by him, and he brought it across from the Belle Claire nurseries in New York. And he brought it across under the name of Bensonhurst Purple. And indeed, looking into this different variety of figs and into kind of the New York areas in general, I found a post by a Reddit user in 2020 by the name of Parsake. He put up a post where he mentions that Brooklyn is famous for its fig trees and the kind of the Italian immigrants that brought them across. And he claimed in his post the Chicago Hardy that you most commonly see at the big box stores and the nurseries was actually a fig that was discovered in the backyard of an Italian immigrant. And that very well might be true. Maybe it's a myth, maybe it's a legend, maybe it's hearsay. But either way, and looking into this a bit further, we can say a few things. Number one, the Belle Claire nursery is in New York, and in the area of Brooklyn, there are a lot of Italian and Sicilian migrants. In fact, there is, in Brooklyn, a neighborhood called Bensonhurst of the Bensonhurst Purple / Chicago Hardy fame. And so I was looking a bit further and I found an article that was written in 2006 by the name of Thomas Marchio. Now, this Thomas Marchio published an article on a website called Mr. Bella's Neighborhood, and he titled that The Figs of Bensonhurst. And I'm going to read you a little bit about what he wrote in his article. He wrote literally, Uncle Johnny, who lived next door, once told me that the tree had come from a cutting in Sicily. Lots of people on our block claim to have gotten their fig cuttings from relatives in Italy, somehow managing to get them through customs when returning from visits there. As a kid, I knew that these trees were a tie to the old country. Now, I'm not claiming that this particular fig that is spoken about in this article is the Chicago Hardy of the Chicago Hardy fame or the Bensonhurst Purple, but what I am saying is that it seems that the fig culture, the kind of the immigrants from Europe, the Italians, the Sicilians, all the other regions around there did tend to bring their favourite and their kind of heritage cuttings back from trips overseas with them. They wanted to remember a piece of the motherland, and these figs became kind of that attachment to the old country and to the homeland. And so there is a lot of evidence there to suggest that maybe the Hardy Chicago did originate out of Brooklyn or New York and did maybe come from that Belle Claire nursery, which is in that same region, sold originally as this Bensonhurst Purple. Having said that, there is actually no hard proof that any of these Chicago Hardy or any of the Mountain Etna types either originated in Italy or Sicily. In fact, there seems to be a little bit of evidence that suggests that maybe they're actually a French variety. So others have postulated that Condit, for instance, studied a fig that was called Marseille Black or Black Provence, Black Marseille, or Black Provence, and that was studied in 1824 and shared a lot of the characteristics of the Mount Etna figs. And more importantly, if we look back into our list, in the 11th spot, we spoke about the Mount Etna fig in my list, which was the Marseille Black VS. Now, it seems that the history of this particular fig was French in origin. It was said that someone brought a cutting back from France around World War II. And Condit as well kind of was talking about this fig back in 1824. So a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, was talking about these French figs that shared all of the same characteristics. And so there is a possibility that these figs never originated in Italy or Sicily, or maybe they migrated from Italy to Sicily to France and then came across. But it wonders to me, like these Sicilians that have this fig that's up Mount Etna that is so unpopular that they didn't even give it a name. Who would take cuttings of this and then import it to France or other parts of Sicily or Italy to finally be brought to America? Maybe it's some people that now lived in America and realized that the climate is different. And maybe they went up Mount Etna and said, oh, wow, look, the conditions up here are much colder, and maybe these figs will do really well back in New Home. Or maybe there's some other explanation behind it, but it seems to me that the Italian professors, the Sicilian professors that Sergio was speaking to, didn't have much interest talking about this particular fig he was trying to talk to them about. They wanted to keep directing him to the better figs. So it's very, very likely or possible that they just flipped him off and didn't have much interest in looking at it or paying much time or attention to that. And maybe the entire Mount Etna class is actually a base of French figs. Who knows? Either way, regardless of the actual origin of the hardy Chicago or any of the Mount Etna types, this remains one of the most popular fig throughout the US, especially in the colder areas. It's one of those figs that can take extreme cold temperatures. It's extremely prolific. It can be burnt down to the ground and still likely fruit in that same year. The figs, as most of the Mount Etna types are small to medium in size. They're dark to very dark. They have a red to deep red interior and a strong to very strong berry flavour. The hardy Chicago is one that's surrounded by myths and legends, ended up in the 5th position on my list, scoring 151 points, being voted on by 44 people as one of their top 5 figs. Okay, we are at the pointier end of our stick, coming towards the end of our journey today. We're past the halfway mark. We're at number 4. And this is another one of those cult favorites, the classics that appear again and again. And if you've been in the fig community, or if you've ever done a search saying what is the best fig in the world, no doubt 100% this is one that has popped up for you. And so I've already spoken about some of maybe the other cult classics out there. We have the Italian 258, which appears over and over again, but this particular fig, I would say, is even more so. And it is, of course, the Black Madeira. Now, the Black Madeira is an interesting one. There's a couple of different strains over there floating about. There's a couple of different synonyms. In this case, it has a synonym of Preto, and I've combined Preto and Black Madeira together because so many people have considered them the same. The Black Madeira has, for all its popularity, very little history about where it came from. There's not a lot of history into maybe where it came from before the US, but the general consensus is that it came across around the 1950s from the island of Madeira in Portugal. And this island has a number of really, really great figs. Portugal is known for its great figs, and people suspect that this fig is a local variety known as Violette. So there is a little bit of confusion surrounding the strains of this particular variety. So Black Madeira is one that has 2 very common strains, the UC Davis strain and the Black Madeira KK. And the reason for this is this particular plant was relatively unknown, similar to the I-258, until around 10, maybe 20 years ago, around the 2010 mark, where it suddenly kind of skyrocketed into stardom. And in this time, they found that the UC Davis version of the plant had a lot of demand for cuttings from it because a lot of people were seeking this particular plant based upon everyone that was talking about it. But the UC Davis plants, as we've discussed earlier, often suffered from a bit of fig mosaic virus, not only a bit, but a lot. They were kind of more affected than you would see from the majority of fig plants. And this can do a couple of things. Number one, it can reduce the vigor of the plant, so it can make it grow more slowly or fruit more slowly. It can kill cuttings. It can do a whole lot of dangerous things, especially to young cuttings. And so the UC Davis variety of the Black Madeira was renowned for being a slow and lethargic grower. And somewhere along the lines, a forum member came up with a new variety or a new strain of Black Madeira, which they called Black Madeira KK after their initials. And they claim that this particular strain grew a lot quicker, was far less affected by the fig mosaic virus, and was just overall better. And over time, as new users and current users were looking at the forums, they kind of decided that these were distinct varieties, or potentially distinct at least. Now, the consensus today is that these are the same variety, they're the same strain, there's nothing different about them. There might be a little bit more vigor in the KK kind of variety, and it is, I believe, more popular for that reason. But there isn't actually any evidence to suggest that this is actually the case. Maybe the UC Davis trees just had too much demand, they were taking too many cuttings off the tree, and it just got slow and maybe a little bit sad and unhappy. Today, the Black Madeira is still known for two main things. Number one, it's known for its exceptional flavour, which is how it landed itself in the 4th position on my list. But it's also known for its continued lethargy and a little bit slowness in growing. So it still is affected by fig mosaic virus. Many people actually graft this particular plant onto a more vigorous rootstock, maybe like a brown turkey or another vigorous and hardy plant. But it's really the flavour that pushes this plant apart. It's the one that makes this fig in everybody's mind and spoken about again and again. And many people say that the Black Madeira has the best flavour of any fig that's out there. It's described as a thick-skinned variety that's sometimes chewy. It's described by many, such as Rod Reddy, as having an elegant berry flavour, which is a very sweet and beautiful flavour. It's said to have a drop of honey at the eye and a lot of syrup that pools in the void of the plant. It's obtained that cult status quite strongly amongst the communities. Anywhere you go, if you type in the best fig variety, you're almost certain to come across the Black Madeira coming up from someone in that thread as one of the best figs in the world. So the Black Madeira has gained that moniker of the king or prince of figs, although as all common figs are actually female, it might be more appropriate to call it the queen of figs. The Black Madeira on my list landed in the 4th position, scoring 268 points, and was voted on by 73 people as one of their top 5 figs. Okay guys, we're in bronze place, the 3rd position of the best figs in the entire world. And this is another French fig, an old French fig that's extremely common throughout France. In fact, this fig was said to be the most favourite fig of the French collector Pierre Baud. And this fig is the Ronde de Bordeaux. Now, the Ronde de Bordeaux literally translates to the round of Bordeaux, which kind of alludes to the shape of this fig, which is very round. It's considered one of the hardiest figs in France, and it's suitable for a very wide range of conditions, from humid to hot to rainy to cold, all those different things that make these figs so adaptable and push us up this list so far. Now, this fig has had commercial success across the world. It's commercially sold in France and in parts of the US. It's sold commercially in South Africa and other places. And for a fig that is so common, that is so popular, that is sold commercially, there is very, very little history as to this fig outside of the fact that it probably comes from the Bordeaux region in France. There is no reports on this fig by Condit or others. I can't seem to find any older history of this fig going back, and it just seems to be one of those figs that everyone knows and loves, but maybe doesn't know where it comes from. I don't know. If you do happen to know a little bit more of the history of this fig, I promise I did try, and I just couldn't find anything particularly salient to this individual fig. We can say, though, that it is likely to be from that kind of Bordeaux region in France, and when you do search kind of Condit's monograph to talk about other figs from Bordeaux, we only really have the Violette de Bordeaux, which we will speak about later. This particular fig, I've even done my best to trawl through French websites. I've gone onto French nurseries, French message boards, and tried to read it, but as the French would say of my ability to speak French, it is très très mal. One thing I have worked out, though, by looking at this is that there seems to be a few other synonyms for Ronde de Bordeaux out there. There's one such as Figue du Bordeaux, which some people say is the same, Noir du Bordeaux, which some people say is the same, and even Precoce de Barcelone, which means the precocious of Barcelona. Maybe that even alludes to a Spanish origin. Who knows? You guys can tell me if you do have that information on this fig. Either way, this is a particularly popular fig. It's one of those figs that everybody seems to say you should have in your collection. It has such a range of adaptability and conditions. It's one that if you are a fig collector, or if you have trouble maybe growing other types of figs, this is one you could test in your own yard. It's particularly known for its hardiness. It's one of those figs that is so vigorous that it can be burnt down to the ground from a frost in a particular year and then still come back and put on a good crop of figs for yourself and your family and your friends and all that sort of thing. So it's a really great fig for those reasons. The fruit quality is reported as excellent. It's a small to medium dark fig, so it's dark purple to black. It's got that red, deep red interior and has medium to strong berry flavors and really good sweetness. It's a fig that has maybe a potentially different berry flavor, though. Some people call it a resin berry or a molasses berry. It's got that kind of a little bit of a difference below that some people say makes this fig a unique enough flavor that even if you do have another cold hardy fig in your collection, you could probably still make room for a Ronde Bordeaux. Now, this fig is obviously extremely popular on the forums. It's ended up in 3rd place on my list. It scored 290 points, and it was actually voted on by 79 people as one of their top 5 figs of all time. Ronde Bordeaux. And so, guys, we come to our number 2 on the list, the penultimate fig, the next to last fig, and the fig that takes silver prize in the Fig Olympics. Now, I'm sure that many of you guys that have, especially those of you that have watched my previous videos and have seen all the top 38 figs to date, probably have a pretty good idea what these last 2 figs might be. I mean, there's only so many exceptional figs we can talk about, missing a couple of the biggies. And here we are today. And so before I jump in and actually throw those names out there, I think I want to take a moment just to say thank you to some of the resources I've used putting this video together. In particular, I've used the fig varieties and the fig database websites a fair bit. I think they're a really good starting place for anybody that's interested to learn about any particular fig. They do things like collate photos and little bits of histories and forum posts and videos and things like that in there. So they're actually a really good starting place and a good place to bounce off of if you want to learn a little bit more information about any of these particular varieties. I use the Mountain Figs website a fair bit. The author of that website, who I do believe is on the forums, although I can't remember his name, it's probably Mountain Figs, has done a lot of great work on that site. He's put together a really good amount of information, and for some reason I feel that the information that he's put together is a little bit more in-depth, and maybe it's almost like he's got a bit of insider information or knows something that we all don't. I'm not sure what it is, but I really did find his website useful, and he also has a lot of great pictures and descriptions of varieties and types and things like that. I used Ross Raddy's website, Fig Boss, a fair bit. Now, I particularly like Ross's website because it does a lot of descriptions about the different fig flavors and the groupings and the types of the way that it's broken down into the different flavor groups. I think that's really interesting to me. I know that in a lot of my videos, I just tend to say it's got a strong, intense berry flavor or honey flavors or what it might be, but I haven't actually tasted the majority of these figs myself. So whilst I'm waiting for them all to kind of ripen out in my own plants, I have to go by what's published and have to take general information. So it's good to have somebody that's broken them down into maybe a little bit of a finer category, which I find quite useful. I also find Ross's videos to be quite useful on YouTube. I do watch a lot of those. They're good videos, and I generally run them in the background while I'm doing other things. And whilst on YouTube, I do watch a lot of the Millennial Gardeners videos as well. I do like that he does a lot of tastings on figs, and I think that the way he breaks down his tastings is really good. I love that he's always weighing the figs along with his tastings. So things like that, very, very helpful. And of course, all the forum members out there, everybody that's posted in one of these threads or done your own research and kind of came back and put that out there for someone like myself to read later on, that's what's really allowed a kind of like a compilation of figs like what I've put together to exist. Without that, it would have been absolutely impossible. So thank you all. As I've said right at the start of this series, it's a really great community. I do enjoy reading, even if I'm not much of a participator. I do float around the forums and I read a lot. I do not post very frequently, but I do love reading everything everybody else says. And so jumping straight now into the number 2 spot, and the fig that takes our second place is Smith. And I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for this fig to come up, waiting to hear that name. And this is another one of those figs that in recent times has kind of gained that cult of personality, that kind of following where people, whenever you throw out a thread of the best figs, this is one of those figs that are going to kind of pop up at all times, Smith. And it's one of those figs that has a little bit of history around it, a little bit of stories around it. It's not a particularly old fig, or at least it's not old in the way that we know it now, and especially under the name Smith. But it is a fig that is becoming more and more popular as more people get their hands on it. And so I guess in terms of a little bit of history of this fig, there is a story that's kind of floating around, which I'll call the main story, the primary story, about the origins of this fig. And it actually originated, this story, in 2019, and it came from a listing on the FigBid website, which is, as many Americans know, it's where you go when you buy and sell fig cuttings and other plants. Not very useful for people like me in Australia, but really great resource overseas. And so this particular seller, he came on, his name was Joseph1942, and he came on selling some Smith fig cuttings, and he posted a story there, and that story was kind of picked up and has now been circulated as the origin story for Smith. And it goes something a little bit like this. There was an old man, he was living in Louisiana. He was living in a little place, which name I never can remember, but it's called Platmouth Parish in Louisiana. And he was a man by the name of Mr. Becknell, and he was the grandpa of a young boy, little young Becknell. And they were both kind of pottering around the Becknell farms and planting things and doing the things that grandparents and their grandsons like to do. And he pulled 2 cuttings out of his pocket. And they planted them up, and he said, look, we'll come back in a bit of time, in a year or two, when these have fruited, and then we'll name them. We'll name these 2 cuttings, and we'll go from there. And so, as figs that are planted do, in a few years, it put on some leaves and some figs, and they came back. And the first fig was a black fig. And old man Becknell said, I really like this fig, and I'm going to name it Italian Black, or possibly Native Black. And so he turned to young Becknell, who I'm imagining is 9 or 10 in this little story, and said, what do you want to call your fig? And the boy said, Smith. And he just kind of blurted out the first thing that came to his mind, and that is the story of how the Smith fig got its name, according to Joseph 1942 of FigBid. Now the story goes a little bit further as well. It goes down, and now Mr. Little Young Becknell has grown up, and he's now a Mr. Becknell. He's a man, and this guy from Europe wants to visit his farm and have a look at this Smith fig. And I'm not sure why or how he heard of this Smith fig. And this is an expert of some sort from Europe. But he comes along to the farm, and he looks at the fig, and he said, yep, this is 100% a European fig. But he couldn't say anything else about this fig. That was the extent of his knowledge. And he said, you have a unique fig on your hands. And so with that, that's how the history of the Smith fig was born. And I was kind of looking into it a little bit more. I wanted to see and find out a bit more about what happened to old man Becknell, or even the young boy. And in doing so, I found a post on the Garden Web forums 10 years prior to the FigBid story. And it has some similarities, but it also has some differences. And this particular post was a guy that was responding to another post where someone was asking for pictures of the Smith fig. And he went by the username Hieyell, Hiyeell. And his name was Henry. And Henry was responding in this fig, and he says that he actually visited the Becknell farms, and he had a chat with Saxon Becknell, who was the owner of the farms, or one of the owners at the farm at the time. And according to Henry, he sat down and in fact toured the entire farms for a whole day and was asking a lot of questions about these figs, because he had a big interest in the Smith fig and its origin as well. And according to Henry, Saxon said, yes, the Smith fig is definitely on the farm, and it's one of my 3 favourite figs. There's the Smith, which I love. There's Celeste, which I also love, and then there's the black French fig. That's also the property that I love. And so Henry was talking about it a little bit more, and as he got deeper into the story, Mr. Saxon said, yes, the boy in that planted the fig was my brother Thomas Becknell, and he planted it with my grandfather. We're brothers, and that was my grandfather. But I don't know where the story of the name came from. I don't know how it became named Smith. And I also don't know where the cutting came from. I don't know which country it came from, whether it was US or overseas or anywhere else. I've got no idea. He said that the Celeste fig that he loved so much was still growing in the backyard of the grandpa's place, and this was no longer set in that place called Plymouth Parish, but it was now set in a different place called Bellechasse in Louisiana. So he said that the Celeste is still growing in the grandpa's place, the Smith is still growing in the grandpa's place, and over the back fence in the grandpa's orchard is the black French fig. And according to this story, the black French fig was actually given to Grandpa Becknell by Grandpa Becknell's brother, who had just come back from France. And so that was a little bit of an interesting history, and there seems to be a few things in there that make a lot of sense. Number one, Saxon Becknell does indeed still have an orchard out there in Bellechasse in Louisiana. Number two, this was 10 years prior to that fig bid story, so Henry at the time wasn't trying to sell anything. He wasn't trying to he wasn't spruiking anything. He wasn't trying to do anything except give his own information. And it does seem, according to his story, that he did actually go out there and speak directly to one of the Becknell families of the Smith fig fame. And in his post, he also alludes to actually have taken notes during this meeting, because he was referring to some dates. And he said, I'm not quite sure about these dates. I'd have to go back to my notes and check, which to me implies that he took notes. And so very, very interesting story. It's interesting to me as well that nowhere along the way does it mention anything about Croatia. So on the forums and on the kind of histories that you see attached with the Smith fig, it's apparently a Croatian fig. I'm not sure where that came from, whether that's someone's who's got inside information kind of released that information and I didn't see it. It certainly doesn't appear in the story in Figbid. It doesn't appear in Henry's story either. Maybe Becknell is a Croatian name. I don't know. I do know that when you're looking around the web, there's definitely a couple of mentions around France. So in one of the stories, of course, it was Grandpa Becknell's brother coming back with France with that black fig cutting. And there was also in a different post, which I can't recall where, I think it was on Figs for Fun or Our Figs, saying that the Becknells were quite frequently bringing cuttings back from France. So if I was a betting man, and I do like to bet, I would actually put my money on it being some sort of French, maybe Italian, maybe Spanish fig, something from that little region of Europe down there. And that's where I would place my money, unless there's some other story I don't know. So if somebody knows why we have a Croatian origin, chuck it down in the comments. I would love to read that piece of information. So going on a little bit further, a little while later in the same year, 2009, there was another post on the Garden Web forums, and this post was by a lady who basically said, look, I'm in Louisiana and I'm going around to nurseries and I keep seeing this fig pop up called Native Black. Now, if we refer back to the first story, the guy on Figbid, he actually said that the black fig that was planted by Grandpa Becknell was a black fig that he was going to call Native Black. So there's these little bits and pieces are all kind of tying in together. And Henry jumps into that kind of that thread as well, and he talks a little bit more about the Smith fig. He says that he toured the farm and he met up with Saxon Becknell and the nephew Tommy Becknell, and he basically spent a day there going through. And he reiterates in that thread that neither of these two guys actually knew where the Smith name came from or where the cutting actually originated. So it is up in the air. It's a mystery that will probably never be fully solved unless there's someone out there that has secret ties that knows the actual answer. And again, you know where to put that information. So based on that story, though, we can probably clearly put a few things together about this Smith fig. Number one, it's definitely from Louisiana, and it was probably planted in the early 1900s. It's one of those figs that is definitely planted by the Becknell family, and it's come from overseas, and it was probably either France or maybe Croatia. This particular fig is an interesting one nowadays. It appears in a lot of those threads about the best figs of all time. It appears over and over again. Lots of people have great things to say about the Smith fig. Another type of thread that it always appears in is the ugliest figs. It's not known to be the most beautiful fig around. It's kind of a green fig that can have like a purple colouring to it. That can often be really affected heavily by sugar spots. And I know that sugar spots are the sign of a nice, good, sweet fig, and generally means it's going to be a tasty fig, but I just hate the look of them. I think that it does make for an ugly fruit. So ugliness aside, though, it is one of those great fruits. It makes up for what it makes up for in ugliness. It kind of adds back in terms of flavour and adaptability. Being a fig that's acclimatised to the south of the US, it's good in humid conditions, rainy conditions, hot conditions. It can spread further out of those into more kind of easy conditions as well. I'm not quite sure on the cold hardiness on this one. I do believe it requires a little bit of a longer summer to ripen. It's meant to be a very prolific fig as well, so once it does get going and start fruiting, it's meant to be very prolific. It's meant to have a spectacular flavour described as very sweet with a complex berry finish. It can be syrupy and jammy, and it's known for having a lot of honey kind of dripping out of that eye of the fruit. And a lot of people say that it should be one of the key plants in your collection. So the Smith fig immortalises itself on this list firmly in the second position. On my list, it scored 295 points, and it was voted on by 81 people as one of their top 5 figs. And so, guys, we have made it. We're here. The number 1 fig in our list. We've been on a journey around the world. We've seen some of the best figs that people have brought up, the best figs people have to offer, and we've settled. We're here in the number 1 spot, finally ready to hear what that fig is. And it's been a very long time since I put that very first kind of fig video together and started plotting this whole series out in my head. And at many times during this, I've kind of wondered whether or not I've bitten off a little bit more than I could chew. But we're here and we've done it. And so the number 1 fig in the world is a very old fig, isn't it? And with all of those old figs, it has a number of synonyms. And in fact, this fig is so popular, it ended up on my top 40 list twice. I had to remove a synonym earlier in my list, and if you go back and watch, I think it was the second video, you'll see that I had to remove a fig from that list, and that fig was Negron, which turned out to be a synonym for Violette de Bordeaux. Now, this fig is so popular that on my list, even without the points of Negron and combining it with Violette de Bordeaux, Violette de Bordeaux was still in the second place on my list, and these points just catapulted it far and beyond the first place. Smith was sitting there originally and then lost its crown once I realised my little error, and so here we are today. And in fact, it's a little bit funny for me. The Violette de Bordeaux brings back a few memories for me. I remember when I was first starting my own kind of fig collection journey. I had a few figs, maybe 3 or 4 different figs in a pot and a fig growing in the ground. And in Australia, we are very limited in the varieties, or at least we were back then limited in the varieties that were available to us. We had maybe 4 or 5 varieties you could pick up at the nursery, maybe 6. And the good varieties were not really available, none of these interesting ones. They may have been held by some people, but they were not distributed or anything. And I remember reading at the time and trying to fantasize and work out my favourite fig, and the fig I really wanted was, and I decided at that time it was actually Violette de Bordeaux. And it's funny because I used to spend so much time obsessing over the forums and reading posts and putting them together, and I never actually kind of contributed to the forum. I'm just kind of more of a reader than a poster. But I thought I would go back and kind of look and kind of refresh my memory on this and see where I was back then. And so I brought up my old Figs for Fun profile in my forum, and I found my very first post that I ever posted, and it just so happened to be about Violette de Bordeaux. And what's more interesting is I checked the date on that post, and that date, it was actually posted on the 7th of February 2013. And so we sit here today, I'm recording this video, it's quite late at night, it's nearly 11 p.m, but today is the 7th of February 2023, exactly 10 years to the day of posting that original video, that thread, posting that thread asking about the Violette de Bordeaux. And in fact, the title of my thread was Violette de Bordeaux in Australia, cuttings in Australia. And I wrote, "Hi all, this is my first post here, although I've been lurking and reading for a while now, and I find this forum a great source of information. I'm currently attempting to grow a number of figs in containers and one in ground in Canberra, Australia, and have become enamoured with the thought of owning a Violette de Bordeaux. Today, though, obviously things have changed a lot. I have at least 50 or 60 varieties just outside that door in the yard, and I own at least 2 Violette de Bordeaux. I own a couple of Petite Albique, which is another potential synonym for Violette de Bordeaux, and so things have really changed for me, and I look back and it's just interesting to watch these changes over time. But we aren't here to talk about me and my wondrous fig journey today. We are here to talk about this particular fig, Violette de Bordeaux. And it's an interesting fig. It's another very old fig, and it was one that was reported on by Condit, but he reported on it just under the name Plain Old Bordeaux, and Violette de Bordeaux was listed as a synonym at that time. Prior to that, it is thought of as being extremely old fig from around the 1690s, around 1692, where it was known as Angelique or Angelique Noir. And then later on in the 1700s is when it started to adopt that name Bordeaux or Violette de Bordeaux. It was in the 1700s that the fig Negron was also considered to be the same variety, and the majority of people said that at that time Violette de Bordeaux and Negron were the same fig, although Eisen was kind of hanging out there saying, yeah, they're very, very similar, but they're actually different plants. In 1715, it was reported on by a guy called Garadel that Negron was so common that it could be found in nearly every single vineyard, in every single field near Ai. And the following authors after that also commented that it was such a common tree around Paris and Bordeaux and the city of Garonne. And at the exact same time, just across the pond in England, they were growing this same variety, Violette de Bordeaux, and reporting how great of a plant it was, fruiting in England and producing really exceptional quality fruits. So this fig was introduced to California again as part of the Chiswick collection, and it was sent over as either Negron or Bordeaux, and it is confirmed today that they're all the same, they're all Violette de Bordeaux. And the popularity of this fig cannot be understated. The Violette de Bordeaux today is one of the most commonly available figs that you can find. If you're in a country like the US, you can essentially walk into any nursery or big box store and find yourself a fig tree, and there's a very, very good chance that there'll be a Violette de Bordeaux there. Many forum members say that this plant, the Violette de Bordeaux, is not only a must-have in every collection, but can be the cornerstone or the key plant in every collection because it is so reliable, it is so tasty, and it is so easy to grow year after year after year. And some growers that have heaps and heaps of varieties consistently claim that Violette de Bordeaux is their number one choice. And it's got a little bit of a humbleness to it as well. So the Violette de Bordeaux, unlike some of the big figs on this list, unlike the Italian 258s and the Smiths and some of the rarer varieties, it doesn't cost nearly anything to buy. Extremely cheap. You can get cuttings for dollars online. It is a really great plant. If you're in Australia, you can find this at specialist nurseries. Sometimes Dallies will stock it. Sometimes places like Yalka and others will stock it. You can get a hold of people on some of the fig exchange groups, and it is a very easy and very cheap fig to get a hold of as a cutting, even in Australia. The Violette de Bordeaux, it's a small to medium-sized fig. It has dark purple to black skin. It has a deep red to very dark red interior, and it has a very sweet flavour with a rich and complex berry flavour. And I thought I would pull aside some of the comments that people have made regarding the Violette de Bordeaux on the flavour itself, just to give you an idea of how people report the flavour of this fig. So a forum member called JMRTSUS, so Jamurtsis, if that's how you pronounce your name, said, "It's a rich fig taste laced with sugar. Soft dried just magnifies both, and it's truly like eating a soft fig candy." Mountain Figs wrote of this fig that it boasts a premier flavour of molasses strawberry jam that is so flavourful and multifaceted. In Australia, Daly's, the nursery, put out a video on this fig and described the flavour. And they said in their videos, I think it is one of the most amazing figs I think I've ever eaten in my whole entire life. They are so sweet, but it's a gorgeous sweetness, like the most beautiful fig jam you could ever eat in your entire life. And the Millennial Gardener also did a video and a tasting on the Violette de Bordeaux, and he said, oh wow, for a fig that is so common and so easy to get, that is absolutely fantastic. This is one of the most intensely berry-flavoured figs I've had in my entire life. It almost tastes like a strawberry and a blueberry put together, but more intense and more jammier and more sugar. And so with comments like those, how can you not step by and not think about this fig with your mouth watering? But outside its flavour, that's not all this fig has going for it. It's so adaptable. It's very versatile in a range of conditions. It can do heat and cold. It fruits year after year. It's extremely prolific. Some people say that the Violette de Bordeaux will fruit on every single node, and sometimes even throw off multiple fruits on every single node, just fruiting every single year. And so with those comments, I'm going to wrap up our list. I'm going to finish us up here today, crowning the king/queen of all fruits, the Violette de Bordeaux, one of the people's choice, the champion, the favourite, and it scored 352 points, being voted on by 89 people as one of their top 5 figs. And guys, that's it. That wraps our list. We're done. No more waiting. We've got to the end. I've done it all out. I've got a little bit of editing to go, but the hard part is all done. We've got all the text and everything down, so I'm sure we'll have this up for you. Probably not tonight, but maybe by tomorrow morning/afternoon, I'll have this up for you all to watch. Thank you all for coming along. It has been a lot of learning for myself as well. I've learned a lot of things about these figs that I didn't know, and it really kind of expanded what I have in my own collection and things that I want to kind of own in my collection. I'm happy to say that every fig in that top 10, I do own every one of those top 10s. I haven't tasted the majority of them, mind you, but I do own them. So in the next few years, I'll be able to personally verify the quality of each of these figs, provided that they are actually true to type. And so I'll leave you there. If you did enjoy any parts of this video, you know what to do. There's buttons that do great things, so punch those buttons in. And I guess, guys, I'll just have to see you all in the next one. See you later.